The mining colony on Kepler 442b had been operating for 3 standard years when the Zephyrian warships appeared in the system's outer rim. Commander Sarah Chun watched the sensor displays from the Colonial Defense Station, her coffee growing cold as 17 massive vessels materialized from hyperspace jumps. Each ship stretched nearly 2 kilometers in length, their bioorganic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that served as both communication and intimidation. "Ma'am, we're receiving a transmission," reported Lieutenant Torres from the communications console. His voice carried the tension that had gripped the entire station since the alien fleet's arrival. Sarah straightened in her command chair. The Zephyrians had made contact with humanity only 6 months ago through diplomatic channels, establishing what appeared to be peaceful first contact protocols. Their advanced technology and seemingly benevolent nature had impressed the Terran colonial authority. Now, seeing their military might firsthand, Sarah understood why they had been so confident in their diplomatic overtures. "Put it through, Lieutenant." The main viewscreen flickered before displaying the imposing figure of a Zephyrian commander. The alien stood nearly 3 meters tall, its elongated limbs ending in 4-fingered hands that moved with predatory grace. Its skin shifted between deep purple and electric blue, while multiple sets of compound eyes provided it with an unervingly comprehensive field of vision. Most unsettling were the neural tendrils that writhed from the back of its skull, occasionally sparking with bioelectric energy. "Human Administrator," the Zephyrian spoke, its voice a harmonious blend of multiple tones that the translation matrix rendered into crisp standard English. "I am Fleet Commander Vexhai of the 3rd Territorial Expansion Legion. Your mining operations on this world will cease immediately. You have 12 standard hours to evacuate all personnel to your orbital facilities." Sarah felt her blood pressure spike, but years of military training kept her voice steady. "Commander Vexhai, this colony operates under legitimate Terran colonial authority permits. We've established no hostile intent toward your species. What grounds do you have for this ultimatum?" The alien's tendrils writhed more rapidly, a sign that their xenobiologists had identified as indicating amusement or contempt. "Grounds? Your species discovered hyperspace travel merely 40 of your years ago. You spread across star systems like a plague, consuming resources without consideration for established territorial claims. This system belongs to the Zephyrian Empire, as determined by our comprehensive galactic surveys conducted 3,000 years before your species achieved crude metallurgy." "We had no knowledge of your prior claims," Sarah responded. "Our deep space surveys detected no signs of current occupation or territorial markers. If you can provide documentation of your claims, we can negotiate a reasonable settlement." Vexhai's primary eyes focused on her with predatory intensity. "Documentation? Settlement? Your arrogance astounds me. Human. We do not negotiate with vermin who infest our territory. You will evacuate, or we will remove you by force." Sarah's hands clenched involuntarily. The colony housed over 50,000 civilians, including families who had invested their life savings in a mining operation. "Commander, forced evacuation of this magnitude will take weeks, possibly months. We need time to coordinate transport vessels and arrange temporary housing." 12 hours, Vexhai repeated, his bioluminescent patterns shifting to what appeared to be an aggressive crimson. "After that time expires, any humans remaining on the planetary surface will be considered hostile combatants and dealt with accordingly." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Sarah staring at a blank screen. Around the command center, her staff exchanged worried glances. Lieutenant Torres cleared his throat nervously. "Ma'am, should I begin emergency evacuation protocols?" Sarah nodded grimly. "Do it, and get me a priority channel to Terran Defense Command. They need to know what we're dealing with out here." The next 8 hours passed in controlled chaos as the colony's evacuation procedures swung into full operation. Civilian transport shuttles worked around the clock, ferrying colonists to the orbital stations that served as waypoints for larger passenger vessels. The mining equipment, worth billions of credits, would have to be abandoned. Sarah coordinated the massive logistical operation while maintaining constant communication with Earth's military leadership. Admiral Rebecca Harrison, Sarah's former commanding officer and current head of the Terran Defense Fleet, appeared on the priority communication channel exactly 4 hours after the initial contact. "Sarah, I've reviewed your preliminary reports. The diplomatic corps is attempting to establish contact through official channels, but frankly, this Vexhai doesn't seem interested in negotiation. How many civilians have you evacuated? 37,000 so far, Sarah replied, exhaustion evident in her voice. But we got a major problem, Admiral. The Brightwater settlement in the northern continent reported mechanical failures in their primary transport shuttles. They've got nearly 2,000 civilians stranded, including 400 children from the colony's primary school. Admiral Harrison's expression darkened. What's their situation? The settlement's too remote for our emergency shuttles to reach in the remaining time. The terrain's too rough for ground transport vehicles, and their local airfield can only handle small aircraft. We need at least another 18 hours to evacuate everyone safely. And the Zephyrians made it clear they won't extend their deadline. I tried requesting additional time 30 minutes ago. Vexai's response was to target our primary mining facility with what appeared to be a warning shot. The energy beam vaporized a mountain peak 2 kilometers from the main complex. Admiral Harrison was quiet for several moments, processing the implications. Sarah, I need you to get those remaining civilians off-world. Use whatever resources necessary. I'm dispatching the 5th Fleet to your position, but they won't arrive for another 36 hours. Ma'am, with respect, unless we can negotiate with the Zephyrians, those people at Brightwater are going to be trapped when the deadline expires. Then, make sure they're not trapped, Commander. That's an order. Sarah spent the next 2 hours coordinating desperate rescue attempts. Every available aircraft was pressed into service, including civilian vehicles never designed for passenger transport. The colony's emergency services worked beyond their limits, but the numbers were unforgiving. As the deadline approached, nearly 800 civilians remained at the Brightwater settlement, with the largest group being children from the educational facility. With 1 hour remaining, Sarah made a decision that would haunt her for years to come. She opened a communication channel directly to Vexai's flagship. Commander Vexai, this is Administrator Chun. We need additional time to evacuate our remaining civilians. They're non-combatants, mostly children. Surely your people understand the concept of protecting the innocent. Vexai's image appeared on her screen, his bioluminescent patterns now pulsing with what the xenobiologist had identified as satisfaction. Your weakness disgusts me, human. You plead for time you do not deserve, for lives that hold no value in the greater order of the galaxy. However, your desperation provides an opportunity for instruction. What do you mean? The remaining humans will not be eliminated. Instead, they will serve as examples to your species. They will be relocated to our labor facilities, where they will contribute to the Empire's prosperity. Consider it a merciful alternative to extinction. Sarah felt ice form in her veins. You're talking about slavery. These are innocent people, children who have nothing to do with territorial disputes. I speak of appropriate utilization of resources, Vexai corrected. Your species will learn that defying the Zephyrian Empire carries consequences. These individuals will serve as a reminder of what happens to those who trespass in our territory. I won't allow that to happen. Vexai's tendrils writhed in what appeared to be amusement. You will allow nothing, human. You have no power here. Your primitive weapons cannot challenge our technology. Your fleets are days away from this system. The decision has been made. The communication ended, leaving Sarah staring at her reflection in the dark screen. Around the command center, her staff stood in stunned silence. The implications of the Zephyrian ultimatum were clear. Surrender the remaining civilians to slavery, or watch them die in what would certainly be a futile military resistance. Lieutenant Torres spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. Ma'am, what are your orders? Sarah stood slowly, her mind racing through impossible calculations. Every military protocol dictated surrender in the face of overwhelming force when civilian lives were at stake. The Zephyrian fleet could obliterate the colony's defenses within minutes. Resistance would be suicide, accomplishing nothing except the deaths of everyone involved. But those were children down there. Human children who would grow up as slaves in alien labor camps, never knowing freedom, never seeing Earth or experiencing the life their parents had dreamed of giving them. Torres, get me Colonel Marcus Webb at the Brightwater Defensive Installation. Ma'am, the Colonel evacuated with the first wave of military personnel. Then, give me whoever's in charge down there. The communication screen flickered to life, revealing a young man in civilian clothes standing in what appeared to be a makeshift command post. His name tag identified him as David Park, head of settlement security. Administrator Chun, thank God. We've been trying to reach you for the past hour. The transport situation is worse than we initially thought. The children's evacuation convoy broke down 40 kilometers from the settlement. We've got rescue teams en route, but with the rough terrain and weather conditions, we won't reach them before the deadline. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of command settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. When she opened them again, her expression had hardened into something her military academy instructors would have recognized immediately. Mr. Park, I need you to listen very carefully. The Zephyrians aren't going to kill the civilians who remain after the deadline. They're going to take them as slaves. That's not going to happen on my watch. Ma'am, what are you suggesting? Sarah turned to her tactical officer. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, what's our current defensive capability? Rodriguez consulted his displays, his expression grim. We've got the orbital defense platforms, plus 3 patrol frigates that were conducting system surveys when the Zephyrians arrived. Combined firepower is approximately 0.3% of what the alien fleet is carrying. Time until the 5th fleet arrives? 34 hours, 18 minutes. Sarah nodded slowly, her decision crystallizing with the terrible clarity that comes only in moments of absolute crisis. She had sworn an oath to protect human lives and human freedom. The mathematics of warfare suggested surrender, but the mathematics had never accounted for what humanity would do when their children were threatened. All stations, this is Commander Chun. Prepare for combat operations. We're not surrendering those civilians to slavery. Lieutenant Torres turned from his station, his face pale. Ma'am, the Zephyrian fleet is moving into attack formation. They're scanning our defensive positions. Let them scan, Sarah replied, her voice carrying a steel edge that surprised even her. Maybe they'll learn something about humanity they didn't expect. On the main view screen, the Zephyrian warships began their approach toward the planet, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing with anticipatory energy patterns. Sarah watched them come, knowing that she was about to make a decision that would echo through galactic history. The Zephyrians thought they understood humanity, thought they could predict human responses to overwhelming force. They were about to discover how wrong they could be when someone threatened human children. All hands, battle stations, Sarah announced over the colony-wide communication system. This is not a drill. We stand between innocent civilians and alien slavers. Today we show the galaxy what humanity stands for. The defense stations powered up their energy weapons, their targeting systems locking onto the approaching alien vessels. In the vast darkness of space, 2 civilizations prepared for a confrontation that would determine whether human freedom meant anything in the greater cosmos, or whether it was just another commodity to be traded by more powerful species. Sarah Chun stood in her command center, surrounded by officers who should have been terrified, but instead wore expressions of grim determination. They were about to face impossible odds, to fight a battle they could not win through conventional means. But they would fight nonetheless because sometimes the mathematics of warfare meant nothing compared to the mathematics of human dignity. The first Zephyrian attack came exactly 12 hours after their initial ultimatum, with a precision that spoke to their absolute confidence in human submission. 3 of their bio-ships broke formation and accelerated toward the orbital defense platforms, their hulls glowing with the telltale energy buildup that preceded their primary weapons discharge. Commander Sarah Chun watched the tactical display with the cold calculation of someone who had already accepted death as a likely outcome. The defense platforms were impressive by human standards, each one carrying enough firepower to level a small city. Against the Zephyrian fleet, they represented little more than an inconvenience. Platform Alpha is targeting the lead vessel, reported Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez from his tactical station. All weapons charged and ready. Fire at will, Sarah ordered. The orbital platform's main batteries erupted in synchronized violence, sending streams of coherent energy and kinetic projectiles toward the approaching alien ship. The barrage struck the Zephyrian vessel's shields, creating brilliant flashes of light that illuminated the bio-ship's organic hull structure. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to hope that human weapons might prove more effective than anticipated. That hope died as the alien ship continued its approach, apparently undamaged by the assault. The Zephyrian vessel's response was swift and devastating. A single beam of crimson energy lanced out from its forward section, striking Platform Alpha with surgical precision. The massive defensive installation, which had taken 3 years to construct and position, simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris field, just empty space where hundreds of tons of metal and ceramic had been moments before. Platform Alpha is gone, Rodriguez reported unnecessarily, his voice hollow with shock. Complete molecular disintegration. Around the command center, Sarah's staff stared at the tactical displays in stunned silence. They had known intellectually that they were outgunned, but witnessing the casual destruction of their most powerful defensive asset drove home the reality of their situation with brutal clarity. Platforms Beta and Gamma are repositioning, Rodriguez continued, attempting to establish crossfire patterns. Sarah nodded, though she knew the effort was futile. The Zephyrians were demonstrating their superiority, probably expecting human surrender after the show of force. On the surface of Kepler, 442b, 800 civilians remained trapped at the Brightwater settlement, including nearly 400 children who had been attending the colony's primary educational facility when the evacuation orders came. The communication board chimed with an incoming transmission from the Zephyrian flagship. Fleet Commander Vex-High appeared on the main screen, his bioluminescent patterns now pulsing with what the xenobiologist had identified as mild irritation. Human Administrator, your defensive installations have proven as ineffective as anticipated. Cease this pointless resistance and prepare your remaining population for collection. Their integration into our labor force will proceed immediately. Sarah stepped forward, her jaw set in grim determination. Commander Vex-High, those civilians include children who have committed no offense against your empire. If you have any concept of honor, you'll allow them to be evacuated to our orbital facilities. Vex-High's tendrils writhed in what appeared to be amusement. Honor? An interesting concept from a species that invaded our territory without permission. These juveniles will serve as excellent examples to the rest of your kind. Their conditioning will begin immediately upon transfer to our educational facilities. Educational facilities? They will learn to serve the Empire efficiently. Vex-High explained with the casual tone of someone discussing routine administrative procedures. Young minds adapt quickly to proper instruction. By maturity, they will have forgotten their primitive human origins and become productive members of Zephyrian society. Sarah felt something cold and dangerous settle in her chest. The alien wasn't just talking about slavery. He was describing the systematic erasure of human identity from children who would grow up believing they belonged to their captors. It was a form of cultural genocide that went beyond mere physical bondage. That's not going to happen, she said quietly. Vex-High's compound eyes focused on her with predatory interest. I detect neural stress patterns indicating elevated aggression. Your emotional responses are fascinating, human. Do you actually believe your primitive weapons can prevent our collection operations? Maybe not, Sarah admitted. But we're going to try anyway. She cut the transmission before Vex-High could respond, turning to face her staff. Every officer in the command center was looking at her with expressions that ranged from determination to barely controlled terror. They all understood the mathematics of the situation, but they also understood what was at stake. Lieutenant Torres, patch me through to all remaining defensive units. Include the civilian vessels still in the system. Ma'am, the civilian ships aren't armed. They're just transport and mining vessels. Patch me through anyway. The communication grid expanded to include every human presence in the system. The remaining orbital platforms, the 3 patrol frigates, the evacuation shuttles, the mining ships, even the small personal craft that belonged to colonists who had invested everything in building a new life among the stars. This is Commander Chun to all vessels and installations. You've all seen what we're facing here. The enemy has superior technology and overwhelming firepower. By every rational calculation, we should surrender immediately to prevent unnecessary loss of life. She paused, looking around the command center at faces that reflected her own grim resolve. But they want our children. They want to steal human kids and turn them into slaves who forget they were ever human. That's not a rational calculation anymore. That's an abomination that goes against everything our species stands for. On the tactical display, the Zephyrian fleet was forming up for what appeared to be a coordinated assault on the remaining defensive positions. Their bioships moved with an alien grace that suggested complete confidence in their inevitable victory. I'm not ordering anyone to fight, Sarah continued. Anyone who wants to evacuate with the civilian transports is free to do so. But I'm staying and I'm fighting because some things are more important than survival. Some things are worth dying for. The responses came back immediately, crackling through the communication grid with a unanimity that surprised even Sarah. Platform Beta's commander, Captain Williams, spoke first. Platform Beta stands ready, Commander. We're with you. Frigate Adelaide reporting. We'll follow your lead, ma'am. Mining vessel New Prometheus here. We're not armed, but we've got industrial cutting lasers and a full cargo hold of mining explosives. If you need a kamikaze run, we're your ship. Similar responses echoed from every vessel in the system. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and sorrow as she realized that she had just convinced dozens of her fellow humans to die for a principle that the rest of the galaxy apparently didn't share. All units, this is Commander Chun. We're not going to win this fight through conventional tactics. The enemy has superior firepower and defensive systems. But they've made one critical error in their calculations. What's that, ma'am? Asked Captain Williams from Platform Beta. They think they understand humanity because they've observed our diplomatic responses and studied our technology. But they've never seen us when our children are threatened. Today we're going to show them the difference between human civilization and human survival instincts. Sarah turned to Rodriguez at the tactical station. What's the status of the quantum communication array? Still operational, ma'am. We maintain real-time contact with Terran Defense Command. Good. Start transmitting everything. I want full tactical and technical data streams going back to Earth. Whatever happens here, our people need to learn from it. The Zephyrian attack resumed with devastating efficiency. The remaining orbital platforms found themselves targeted by multiple bio-ships simultaneously, their shields overwhelmed by concentrated energy bursts that made their previous defensive efforts seem pathetic by comparison. Platform Beta managed to score several direct hits on its attackers, but the alien ships absorbed the damage without apparent effect. Captain Williams' final transmission came through clearly as his platform's shields collapsed. This is Beta. Shields down, hull breaching. We're going to ram the nearest target. Tell Earth that we tried. Platform Beta's death was not the quick disintegration that had claimed Alpha. Instead, Williams managed to execute a controlled collision course with the nearest Zephyrian vessel, accelerating his massive installation directly into the bio-ship's port section. The explosion when the platform's fusion reactors breached was visible from the planetary surface, a brief star that marked the first human blood drawn in what would become known as the Children's War. The Zephyrian ship survived the impact, but Sarah's I caught the subtle changes in its maneuvering patterns that suggested significant damage. For the first time since the battle began, she felt a flicker of something that might eventually grow into hope. Rodriguez, did you see that? Yes, ma'am. The enemy vessels operating at reduced efficiency. Slower acceleration. Delayed weapon charging cycles. They're not invulnerable, Sarah murmured, her mind racing through tactical possibilities. Their technology is superior, but it's not magic. Sufficient kinetic force can overwhelm their defensive systems. She opened a communication channel to the remaining human forces. All vessels, new tactical doctrine. We can't match their energy weapons, but we can hurt them with kinetic impacts. Ramming attacks will be our primary offensive capability. Ma'am, interrupted Lieutenant Torres. We're receiving a priority transmission from the Brightwater settlement. Sarah's attention snapped to the surface communication grid. David Park appeared on her screen, but the background behind him showed clear signs of combat damage. Smoke drifted through the makeshift command post, and the distant sound of weapons fire could be heard through the audio pickup. Commander Chun, we've got major problems down here. Zephyrian ground forces have landed, and they're advancing on the settlement. We've armed every civilian who can hold a weapon, but their technology is beyond anything we've ever seen. What about the children? The evacuation convoy is still stranded 40 kilometers out. Our rescue teams reached them, but the vehicles can't navigate the terrain in time to avoid the alien advance. We're looking at approximately 6 hours until the enemy reaches their position. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible decisions. The space battle was consuming all her attention and resources, but the real objective had always been protecting those children. Everything they were doing in orbit meant nothing if the ground forces reached the stranded evacuation convoy. Park, I need you to hold the settlement as long as possible. By time for the rescue operations. Ma'am, we're civilians with hunting rifles and mining equipment. We can't stop a professional military force. You don't have to stop them, Sarah replied. You just have to slow them down. Make them pay for every meter of ground. Make it expensive enough that they start questioning whether this operation is worth the cost. She cut the transmission and turned back to the space battle, where the Zephyrian fleet was systematically eliminating the remaining human defenses. The 3 patrol frigates were conducting hit-and run attacks, using their superior speed to avoid direct confrontation while harassing the larger bioships with torpedo strikes. Their efforts were brave, but ultimately futile. The alien vessels absorbed the damage without significant effect. "Ma'am," Rodriguez called out. "Incoming transmission from Admiral Harrison." Admiral Rebecca Harrison appeared on the priority channel, her expression grim. "Sarah, we've been monitoring your tactical feeds. The Fifth Fleet is still 30 hours out, but I'm authorizing immediate deployment of our experimental weapon systems." "What experimental systems?" "Project Prometheus. We've been developing it in response to theoretical alien contact scenarios. It's a quantum entanglement communication system coupled with remote-controlled antimatter charges. We can deploy them through your quantum transmitters." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "How much antimatter are we talking about?" "Enough to eliminate everything in a 50-kilometer radius." "But, Sarah, the deployment time is 8 hours minimum, and we can only target fixed coordinates. You'd have to get the enemy fleet into a specific area and keep them there." "What about the civilians on the surface?" Admiral Harrison was quiet for a moment. "The Prometheus charges can be programmed for surface or orbital detonation. If you detonate in orbit, the surface populations should survive the initial blast. But the electromagnetic pulse will disable all electronic systems on the planet. Emergency services, life support systems, communication networks, all gone." Sarah stared at the tactical display, where her forces were being methodically destroyed by an enemy that viewed human life as a commodity to be harvested. The Zephyrians had made it clear that negotiation was impossible, that mercy was weakness, and the human children would spend their lives as slaves in alien labor camps. "Admiral, transmit the deployment coordinates. We'll find a way to get them in position." "Sarah, you understand what you're authorizing? This will be the first use of antimatter weapons in human combat history. The political ramifications alone— Admiral, with all due respect, politics don't matter if our children grow up as slaves. Send the charges." The next phase of the battle would require a level of tactical coordination and personal sacrifice that went beyond anything in human military history. Sarah looked around the command center at officers who had already proven their willingness to die for human freedom. Now, she was going to ask them to die for human dignity as well. The Zephyrians thought they had encountered a typical spacefaring species, one that would submit to superior force and accept the galactic order as established by more advanced civilizations. They were about to learn that humanity operated by different rules when their children's freedom was at stake. The antimatter deployment systems materialized in the outer system 6 hours after Admiral Harrison's authorization, emerging from quantum transmission points that represented the cutting edge of human scientific achievement. Commander Sarah Chun watched the tactical display as 12 cylindrical devices, each no larger than a personal shuttle, took position in a carefully calculated grid pattern around Kepler 442b. "Project Prometheus is online," reported Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and terror. "Antimatter charges are stable and responding to our control signals." Sarah nodded grimly. The weapons represented humanity's last desperate gambit, but they came with a price that made her stomach clench. To effectively deploy the charges, she would need to lure the Zephyrian fleet into the predetermined kill zone and hold them there for the 8-minute arming sequence. With most of her defensive forces already destroyed, that would require a level of tactical audacity that bordered on insanity. "What's the status of our remaining assets?" 2 patrol frigates are still operational, but running low on ammunition. The mining vessel New Prometheus is standing by for ramming attack. 6 civilian transports with improvised weapon systems are maintaining position near the outer system marker. Sarah studied the tactical board, her mind racing through possibilities that all seemed to end in catastrophic human losses. The Zephyrian fleet had settled into a standard orbital bombardment formation, preparing to eliminate the remaining ground-based resistance before beginning their collection operations. Fleet Commander Vex High clearly considered the space battle won, and was moving toward the phase of the operation that truly mattered to him: harvesting human slaves. "Rodriguez, can we get a communication link to the New Prometheus?" "Yes, ma'am." Captain Morrison is standing by. The grizzled face of Captain James Morrison appeared on Sarah's secondary screen. The mining vessel captain had spent 30 years working the asteroid belts before joining the Kepler colony, and his weathered features carried the kind of determination that came from a lifetime of surviving in hostile environments. Commander Chun, my ship is loaded with 14 tons of industrial explosives and positioned for attack run on the enemy flagship. Give the word, and we'll show these aliens what human stubbornness looks like. Captain Morrison, I need you to hold position for now. We're implementing a new tactical plan that will require precise timing. Ma'am, with respect, my crew is ready to die fighting. We've got families down there too. Sarah felt the familiar weight of command decisions that would haunt her regardless of their outcome. Captain, your sacrifice might be necessary, but I need it to count for maximum effect. Can you give me 15 minutes to coordinate? You've got it, Commander. Sarah turned her attention to the surface battle, where David Park's civilian defenders were conducting a fighting withdrawal from the Brightwater settlement. The Zephyrian ground forces had landed in force, deploying biomechanical warriors that moved with inhuman speed and coordination. Early reports suggested that human small arms were largely ineffective against the alien soldiers' natural armor plating. Torres, patch me through to the surface command post. David Park's image appeared on the screen, but the background chaos had intensified dramatically. The sound of alien weapons fire was now constant, punctuated by the deeper reports of human explosives. Park himself showed signs of combat stress, his face streaked with dirt and what appeared to be alien blood. Commander, we're falling back to the secondary defensive line. The enemy forces are unlike anything in our military databases. They're partially organic, partially mechanical, and they seem to coordinate through some kind of hive mind communication system. What about the children? The rescue convoy is still 40 kilometers out, but the terrain is working against us. The alien advance is faster than anticipated. We estimate 18 hours until they reach the convoy's position. Sarah glanced at the countdown timer for the antimatter deployment sequence. If she initiated the orbital strike now, the surface battle would become irrelevant, but the children would still be trapped in the wilderness when the electromagnetic pulse disabled all rescue vehicles. Park, I need you to hold for 18 hours. Whatever it takes. Ma'am, that's impossible. We're outnumbered 20-1 by enemies with superior technology and what appears to be zero regard for casualties. Sarah paused, considering options that all seemed to lead to unacceptable outcomes. The mathematics of warfare were brutally clear. She could save the orbital civilians or the surface civilians, but probably not both. Any decision would result in human deaths that could have been prevented by surrender and acceptance of slavery. Park, what if you had reinforcements? What kind of reinforcements? Our evacuation transports aren't equipped for combat operations. Sarah looked at the tactical display, showing the 6 civilian vessels holding position in the outer system. They were cargo haulers and passenger ships designed for peaceful commerce rather than warfare. But they were also crewed by humans who had volunteered to fight impossible odds rather than surrender their children to alien slavers. Lieutenant Torres, open a channel to all civilian vessels in the outer system. The communication grid expanded to include the transport captains, each face reflecting the grim determination that had become humanity's defining characteristic in this conflict. Sarah recognized most of them from pre-war colony meetings. Merchant spacers, cargo haulers, and passenger transport operators who had never expected to face combat. Captains, I need volunteers for a ground assault mission. We have civilians trapped on the surface with approximately 18 hours before enemy forces reach them. The mission will require atmospheric entry under hostile fire with minimal ground support. Captain Elena Vasquez of the transport vessel Maria Elena spoke first. Commander, our ships aren't designed for combat landings. We'll be sitting ducks for their air defense systems. I understand the risks, Captain, but those civilians include nearly 400 children who will spend their lives as slaves if we don't extract them. The response came back with the same unanimity that had characterized human decisions throughout the crisis. One by one, each civilian captain volunteered for a mission that would almost certainly result in their death. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and grief that had become all too familiar over the past day. All vessels begin atmospheric entry procedures. Coordinate with Mr. Park for landing zones near the evacuation convoy. Your mission is to buy time for the rescue operation, not to achieve military victory. As the civilian transports began their descent toward the planet's surface, Sarah turned her attention back to the orbital battle. The Zephyrian fleet was maintaining position above the primary settlements, their bioships pulsing with the energy patterns that preceded large-scale bombardment operations. Rodriguez, initiate the Prometheus arming sequence. Target grid centered on coordinates 7-7 Alpha. Ma'am, that will put the detonation point directly over the primary civilian settlements. I know. Sarah's voice was steady despite the magnitude of what she was authorizing. The electromagnetic pulse will disable their technology along with ours. It's the only way to stop the collection operations. The arming sequence for the antimatter charges required absolute precision, with each device synchronizing its quantum field generators to create a coordinated explosion that would eliminate everything in the target zone. Sarah watched the countdown timer while coordinating the most complex tactical operation in human history. Frigate Adelaide is beginning attack run on the enemy flagship, Rodriguez reported. Frigate Toronto is targeting the command vessel's escort ships. The two surviving human warships accelerated toward the Zephyrian fleet in what appeared to be a conventional suicide attack. Sarah had briefed their captains on the real mission: draw the enemy ships into the optimal position for the antimatter strike, while maintaining the illusion of desperation rather than calculated strategy. Frigate Adelaide opened fire at maximum range, sending a spread of fusion torpedoes toward Vexhi's flagship. The bioship's defensive systems intercepted most of the incoming ordnance, but several torpedoes penetrated the alien shields and detonated against the vessel's organic hull. For the first time since the battle began, the Zephyrian flagship showed visible damage, with bioluminescent sections flickering erratically. Vexhi's response was swift and overwhelming. The alien vessel's primary weapon systems targeted Adelaide with focused energy beams that stripped away the frigate's shields within seconds. But Captain Martinez had anticipated the response, using his ship's death throws to mask a final torpedo spread that struck the Zephyrian vessel's command section. Adelaide is gone, Rodriguez reported, but she scored significant damage on the flagship. Enemy vessel is showing reduced maneuvering capability. On the surface of Kepler 442b, the civilian transport vessels were conducting their own desperate mission. Sarah watched the tactical feeds as cargo haulers and passenger ships attempted combat landings in hostile territory, their civilian crews manning improvised weapon systems against alien air defense networks. The Maria Elena was first to reach the planet's surface, executing a controlled crash landing 40 kilometers from the stranded evacuation convoy. Captain Vasquez and her crew of merchant spacers emerged from their damaged ship carrying hunting rifles and mining explosives, preparing to face biomechanical warriors with technology centuries more advanced than anything in the human arsenal. Surface Team Leader Park, this is Commander Chun. What's the status of the ground operation? Park's voice crackled through the communication link, distorted by interference from alien jamming systems. Commander, the civilian volunteers are in position around the convoy. We've established a defensive perimeter, but the enemy forces are adapting to our tactics faster than anticipated. Explain. The alien soldiers seem to learn from each engagement. Tactics that work in the first encounter become ineffective by the second. It's like fighting an enemy that evolves in real time. Sarah felt a chill of understanding. The Zephyrians weren't just technologically superior. They possessed adaptive intelligence systems that allowed their forces to counter human tactics through direct battlefield experience. Every minute of combat made the alien forces more effective while depleting human resources. Rodriguez, how long until the Prometheus charges are fully armed? 6 minutes, 30 seconds. On the tactical display, the Zephyrian fleet was repositioning to provide fire support for their ground forces. The bioships descended toward the planet's surface, their energy weapons beginning systematic bombardment of known human positions. Each blast eliminated defensive positions that had been constructed by civilian volunteers using improvised materials. All surface teams, this is Commander Chun. Prepare for immediate extraction. Repeat, prepare for immediate extraction. Ma'am, Park responded, we're not in position to extract the children. The convoy is still pinned down by enemy forces. Sarah stared at the countdown timer, watching seconds tick away toward humanity's first use of antimatter weapons in combat. The Zephyrian fleet was now positioned perfectly within the kill zone, but deploying the charges would doom every human on the planet's surface to death by electromagnetic pulse. Park, what's the minimum time you need to reach the convoy? 20 minutes if we abandon all defensive positions and run flat out. Rodriguez, can we delay the Prometheus detonation? Not without losing target lock on the enemy fleet. The moment they detect the antimatter charges, they'll scatter beyond effective range. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a decision that would define humanity's place in galactic history. She could eliminate the Zephyrian threat and save the orbital civilians, or she could allow the alien fleet to complete their collection operations and escape with hundreds of human slaves. Or she could attempt something that had never been tried in the history of human warfare. Rodriguez, prepare for manual detonation sequence. I want individual control over each antimatter charge. Ma'am, manual detonation requires direct neural interface with the quantum control systems. The radiation exposure alone, do it. Sarah moved toward the neural interface chamber that had been installed for emergency control of experimental systems. The technology was untested in combat conditions and carried risks that range from permanent brain damage to immediate death. But it would allow her to detonate the antimatter charges individually, creating a cascade effect that might eliminate the Zephyrian fleet while minimizing electromagnetic damage to the planet's surface. As she prepared to interface with humanity's most destructive weapon, Sarah opened one final communication channel to all human forces in the system. All personnel, this is Commander Chun. Today we have learned something important about our place in the galaxy. When our children's freedom is threatened, humans will face impossible odds and pay any price for victory. The aliens who came here thought they understood our species. They were wrong. She activated the neural interface, feeling the strange sensation of her consciousness expanding to encompass weapons systems capable of eliminating everything within 50 light minutes. On the tactical display, the Zephyrian fleet continued their descent toward the planet's surface, unaware that they were about to encounter the full fury of humanity's protective instincts. The neural interface connected with Sarah Chen's consciousness like ice water flooding through her veins, carrying information streams that her human brain was never designed to process. Through quantum entanglement links, she could perceive each antimatter charge as an extension of her own nervous system, feeling their energy patterns like additional heartbeats synchronized to her pulse. The sensation was overwhelming and terrifying. Sarah found herself aware of every Zephyrian bioship in the target zone, their alien energy signatures registering as hostile contacts in her expanded perception. More disturbing were the human life signs scattered across the planet's surface, desperate signatures of courage and terror as civilian volunteers fought to protect children they had never met. Neural interface stable, reported Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, his voice seeming to come from an enormous distance. Quantum control systems responding to Commander Chen's direct input. Sarah forced herself to focus on the tactical situation rather than the bewildering flood of sensory data. The Zephyrian fleet was descending toward the planet in precise formation, their bioship's weapons systems charging for what would be the final bombardment of human resistance. Fleet Commander Vexai's flagship led the attack, its damaged sections pulsing with regenerative energy that spoke to the aliens' remarkable adaptive technology. Through the neural link, Sarah could feel the antimatter charges responding to her intentions, their quantum containment fields fluctuating in harmony with her thoughts. The weapons were positioned in a three-dimensional grid around the planet, each one capable of eliminating everything within a 50-kilometer radius. Used conventionally, they would create an overlapping field of destruction that would sterilize the entire system. But Sarah had something different in mind. Surface teams, this is Commander Chun. I need precise coordinates for all human positions. Transmit immediately. David Park's voice crackled through the communication system, distorted by interference from increasing alien jamming efforts. Commander, we're scattered across approximately 400 square kilometers. The evacuation convoy is still 40 kilometers from the nearest extraction point. I need exact coordinates, Park. Lives depend on precision. As the position data flowed into her consciousness through the neural interface, Sarah began calculating detonation sequences that would eliminate the Zephyrian fleet while creating shadow zones where human personnel might survive the electromagnetic effects. It was theoretically possible, but required split-second timing that pushed the limits of both human reflexes and quantum physics. The first phase of her plan required drawing the enemy fleet into optimal position. Sarah activated the mining vessel New Prometheus through her expanded awareness, feeling Captain Morrison's determination as he prepared for what everyone assumed would be a suicide attack. Captain Morrison, begin attack run on the enemy flagship. Full acceleration, all weapons. Understood, Commander. It's been an honor. The New Prometheus accelerated toward the Zephyrian fleet with the modified engines of a ship designed to haul massive loads across interstellar distances. Morrison's vessel wasn't fast compared to military craft, but it was heavily built and loaded with enough industrial explosives to level a small mountain. Vexai's response was predictably overwhelming. The alien flagship and its escort vessels concentrated their fire on the approaching mining ship, their energy weapons stripping away the improvised armor plating that Morrison's crew had welded to their hull. But the captain had anticipated the response, using his ship's bulk and redundant systems to absorb punishment that would have vaporized a smaller vessel. New Prometheus is taking heavy damage, Rodriguez reported. Hull breaches on multiple decks. Stay on course, Captain, Sarah transmitted through the neural link. 30 seconds to optimal position. Through her expanded awareness, Sarah could feel the Zephyrian fleet's formation tightening as they concentrated on eliminating the human threat. The bioships moved with predatory precision, their organic hulls pulsing with energy patterns that suggested anticipation of final victory. They were positioning themselves exactly where Sarah needed them. Captain Morrison, emergency separation in 10 seconds. Evacuate to escape pods. Negative, Commander. My crew is staying with the ship. We're going to make this count. The New Prometheus struck Vexai's flagship at the precise moment Sarah had calculated, its industrial cargo detonating in a cascade explosion that briefly outshone the system's primary star. The mining vessel's sacrifice created exactly the distraction Sarah needed, drawing the entire Zephyrian fleet into defensive formation around their damaged command ship. Sarah activated the first antimatter charge. The quantum detonation occurred in the space between atomic particles, releasing energy that had been contained since the universe's first moments. The explosion expanded at relativistic velocity, consuming 3 Zephyrian vessels before they could register the threat. But Sarah wasn't finished. Through the neural interface, she guided the expanding energy wave with precision that defied conventional physics, creating corridors of destruction that eliminated alien ships while preserving zones where human forces might survive. The second antimatter charge detonated 4 seconds later, its quantum field synchronized with the first explosion to create a cascading effect that trapped the Zephyrian fleet in overlapping zones of annihilation. Vexai's flagship, already damaged by Morrison's sacrifice, found itself caught between 2 expanding antimatter explosions. The bioship's adaptive technology couldn't compensate for energy release on this scale. Sarah watched through her quantum awareness as the alien vessel's organic hull simply ceased to exist, its molecular structure unraveling under forces that reduced matter to its component quarks. But the plan was taking its toll on Sarah's human nervous system. The neural interface was never designed for extended use, and the quantum feedback from 12 antimatter detonations was causing cascading failures in her brain chemistry. Blood ran from her nose as she fought to maintain conscious control over forces that could sterilize star systems. Commander Chun, neural interface readings are approaching critical levels, Rodriguez warned. You need to disconnect immediately. Not yet, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the quantum static flooding the command center. Still have work to do. On the planet's surface, the electromagnetic pulse from the antimatter explosions was washing over the scattered human positions in carefully modulated waves. Sarah had timed the detonations to create interference patterns that would disable Zephyrian technology while leaving human electronics in the shadow zones functional enough to coordinate evacuation efforts. The alien ground forces found themselves cut off from their command structure, their biomechanical enhancements failing as the quantum disruption interfered with their neural control systems. For the first time since the battle began, human forces possessed a technological advantage. Surface teams, this is Commander Chun. Enemy orbital support has been eliminated. All ground units are disconnected from command authority. Begin immediate extraction operations. David Park's response came back stronger and clearer than before, the alien jamming systems having been eliminated along with their fleet. Commander, the alien soldiers are disoriented. Our small arms are suddenly effective against their armor systems. We're beginning evacuation of the convoy. Sarah felt a moment of satisfaction before the quantum feedback surge nearly knocked her unconscious. The neural interface was burning out her nervous system with each passing second, but she couldn't disconnect until all human forces were clear of the danger zone. Through her expanded awareness, she detected movement in the outer system, massive hyperspace signatures indicating the arrival of additional vessels. For a terrifying moment, Sarah thought the Zephyrians had called for reinforcements. Then, the quantum sensors identified the incoming ships as human vessels flying Terran Defense Fleet signatures. Admiral Harrison's Fifth Fleet had arrived 18 hours early. Commander Chun, this is Admiral Harrison aboard TDF Yorktown. We're reading multiple antimatter detonations in your vicinity. What's your status? Sarah tried to respond, but the neural interface was consuming too much of her cognitive capacity to allow normal communication. Instead, she transmitted her awareness directly through the quantum link, sharing her consciousness with the Admiral in a burst of information that encompassed the entire battle. Admiral Harrison's shock was palpable across the quantum connection. Dear God, Sarah, you've eliminated an entire alien fleet with experimental weapons. How many casualties? Still counting, Sarah managed to whisper. But the children are safe. The evacuation convoy reported successful extraction 12 minutes later, with all 400 children accounted for and en route to orbital facilities. The civilian volunteers who had fought impossible odds to protect them suffered 70% casualties, but they had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. They had faced a technologically superior enemy, and won through sheer determination to protect their young. Sarah finally allowed herself to disconnect from the neural interface, her consciousness snapping back in her human body with jarring intensity. She collapsed immediately, her nervous system overloaded by quantum feedback that would require months of medical treatment to repair. As medical teams rushed to stabilize her condition, Sarah maintained enough awareness to receive the final casualty reports. The human losses were staggering: 3,000 military personnel, 800 civilian volunteers, and most of the colony's infrastructure destroyed by electromagnetic effects from the antimatter explosions. But the Zephyrian losses were absolute. 17 bioships, 2,000 ground forces, and Fleet Commander Vexai himself had been eliminated in the span of 18 minutes. More importantly, the quantum transmission systems had recorded detailed tactical data on every aspect of the battle, information that would revolutionize human understanding of advanced alien technology. Admiral Harrison's voice cut through Sarah's growing unconsciousness as medical teams prepared her for emergency treatment. Commander Chun, the diplomatic corps, wants a full briefing on alien capabilities and intentions. Earth needs to know what we're dealing with. Sarah struggled to focus on the Admiral's words, her thoughts still scattered by neural interface feedback. Admiral, tell them the aliens think of us as vermin to be harvested for slave labor. They see human children as resources to be conditioned into forgetting their origins. Understood. What's your assessment of future threats? Sarah closed her eyes, remembering Vexai's casual dismissal of human rights and dignity. The Zephyrian Empire was vast, technologically advanced, and apparently convinced that might made right in all galactic affairs. This battle had been won, but it was only the beginning of a much larger conflict. Admiral, they'll be back. This was just one fleet from one territorial expansion legion. When the Empire learns what happened here, they'll send forces specifically designed to counter our tactics. Then, we'd better prepare for them. As the medical teams carried her to the emergency shuttle, Sarah took one last look at the tactical display. The space around Kepler 442b was filled with debris from destroyed Zephyrian vessels, their bioorganic components creating patterns that would puzzle xenobiologists for decades. But more important were the quantum signatures indicating successful evacuation of all human civilians. 400 children would grow up free rather than as slaves in alien labor camps. Thousands of colonists would remember their homes rather than forget their human identity. The price in human lives had been terrible, but the alternative would have been worse than death. The shuttle's engines engaged, carrying Sarah toward the medical facilities aboard Admiral Harrison's flagship. As Kepler 442b fell away behind them, she allowed herself to believe that humanity had passed its first test as a galactic species. They had faced overwhelming odds and refused to surrender their children to slavery. The galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler, 442b, the ripple effects of humanity's desperate stand were reshaping galactic politics in ways that no one had anticipated. Commander Sarah Chun sat in the advanced medical facility aboard Earth's primary orbital station, her nervous system slowly recovering from the quantum interface damage that had nearly killed her. The neuroregeneration therapy was working, but the doctors warned that she would never be quite the same. Neither would the galaxy. Admiral Rebecca Harrison entered the medical bay, carrying a datapad filled with intelligence reports that painted a picture of an interstellar community in chaos. The destruction of Fleet Commander Vexhi's expedition had sent shock waves through the Zephyrian Empire and beyond, forcing every spacefaring civilization to reconsider their assumptions about humanity's place in galactic affairs. "Sarah, how are you feeling today?" "Like I've been struck by lightning," Sarah replied, managing a weak smile. "But the doctors say I should regain full cognitive function within another few weeks." "What's the situation report?" Admiral Harrison activated the holographic display above Sarah's bed, showing a three-dimensional map of local galactic space marked with territorial boundaries and military deployments. The Zephyrian Empire's borders, previously expanding aggressively toward human space, had contracted significantly over the past 6 months. "The political fallout has been extraordinary," Harrison explained. "The Zephyrians have withdrawn from 17 disputed systems and recalled their territorial expansion fleets. Our intelligence sources suggest they're dealing with internal rebellions from previously subjugated species." Sarah studied the tactical display with the trained eye of someone who had faced the enemy's military capabilities firsthand. "Rebellions? That seems unlikely given their technological superiority. That's what makes this situation so remarkable. Your quantum transmission data from the battle has been analyzed by every major galactic power. The technical specifications you recorded have given smaller civilizations insights into Zephyrian weaknesses that they never possessed before. The implications were staggering. Sarah's neural interface connection with the antimatter weapons systems had recorded detailed information about alien defensive capabilities, power generation systems, and command structures. That data, transmitted in real time to Earth's scientific community, had been shared through diplomatic channels with other species facing Zephyrian expansion. "Admiral, are you telling me that our battle data has enabled other civilizations to resist the Empire?" "I'm telling you that the Altarian Commonwealth declared independence from the Empire 3 months ago and successfully repelled a Zephyrian fleet using modified versions of your kinetic impact tactics. The Centauri Trade Federation has formed a defensive alliance with 6 other species, all using weapons technologies derived from your battle recordings." Harrison activated a secondary display showing footage from recent conflicts across the local galactic region. Sarah watched in amazement as alien vessels employed ramming attacks, coordinated kinetic strikes, and what appear to be crude antimatter weapons against Zephyrian bioships. "They're copying our desperation tactics," Sarah observed, turning them into systematic military doctrine. "More than that, the psychological impact of your victory has been even more significant than the technical intelligence. For thousands of years, the Zephyrian Empire has maintained control through the assumption of absolute superiority. No one believed they could be defeated by a less advanced civilization." Sarah remembered Fleet Commander Vexhi's casual dismissal of human capabilities, his assumption that superior technology guaranteed victory regardless of human determination. The alien's arrogance had been his downfall, but it had also been shared by every other species in the galaxy. "Have there been any direct responses from the Empire?" Admiral Harrison's expression darkened. "That's why I'm here. We've detected massive military buildups in Zephyrian space, including construction of vessels significantly larger than anything in their previous fleet configurations. Intelligence suggests they're developing specific countermeasures for human tactics. How long until they're ready to move against us?" "Conservative estimates suggest 18 months. Optimistic projections give us 3 years." Sarah felt a familiar chill as she considered the implications. Humanity's victory at Kepler 442b had been won through surprise, desperation, and technological advantages that would never exist again. The Zephyrians would adapt, evolve, and return with forces specifically designed to counter human ingenuity. "Admiral, what's our strategic situation? Are we better prepared than we were 6 months ago?" "In some ways, yes. The antimatter weapons program has been accelerated, and we're deploying quantum communication networks throughout human space. But we're also facing challenges we never anticipated. Harrison activated a new display showing human territorial space, but now marked with symbols indicating internal political tensions. Several colonial systems showed indicators of civil unrest, while others displayed military buildup patterns that suggested preparation for independent action. The outer colonies are demanding their own antimatter weapons and defensive fleets. They don't trust Earth's ability to protect them when the Zephyrians return. Some systems are threatening to declare independence if they don't receive adequate military support. Sarah understood the problem immediately. The Battle of Kepler 442b had demonstrated that individual human colonies could face galactic-scale threats, but it had also shown that Earth's military couldn't be everywhere at once. Colonial governments were drawing the logical conclusion that they needed to provide their own defense. Have any colonies actually declared independence? 3 so far: the Tau Ceti Commonwealth, New Geneva, and the Vega Mining Consortium. They're forming their own military alliances and developing independent research programs. The irony was bitter. Humanity's greatest military victory was fragmenting human space just when unity was most crucial for survival. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of unintended consequences settling on her shoulders. Admiral, there's something else we need to discuss. The children from Kepler 442b. Harrison nodded gravely. The psychological evaluations have been challenging. Most of the kids are dealing with severe trauma from the evacuation and battle experience. But there's something else. Something unexpected. What do you mean? Several of the children have displayed unusual capabilities since the antimatter detonations. Enhanced pattern recognition, accelerated learning abilities, what appears to be limited precognitive flashes. The medical teams think it might be related to quantum field exposure during the battle. Sarah felt a chill of understanding. The quantum effects from the antimatter weapons had been unprecedented in human experience. If the children had been exposed to exotic radiation during the critical developmental years, the long-term consequences could be profound. How many children are affected? 47 out of the 400 survivors, all between the ages of 8 and 14. The abilities seem to be increasing rather than diminishing over time. A communication alert interrupted their conversation, and Admiral Harrison activated the priority channel. The face of President Martinez appeared on the holographic display, her expression carrying the weight of decisions that would shape humanity's future. Admiral Harrison, Commander Chun, we've received a formal communication from the Galactic Mediation Council. They're requesting a diplomatic conference to address the recent conflicts involving human forces. Sarah struggled to sit up straighter despite her medical restraints. Madam President, what's the Council's position on our actions at Kepler 442b? Officially, they're concerned about the escalation of military tensions and the proliferation of antimatter weapons technology. Unofficially, our intelligence sources suggest they're terrified that humanity has upset the galactic balance of power. Admiral Harrison leaned forward. What kind of conference are they proposing? A full diplomatic summit involving all major galactic powers, including the Zephyrian Empire. The Council wants to establish new protocols for territorial disputes and technology sharing. They're particularly interested in restricting antimatter weapons development. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she considered the implications. Madam President, with respect, that sounds like an attempt to disarm humanity while allowing the Zephyrians to maintain their technological advantages. That's my assessment as well, which is why I need your input on our response. The galaxy is watching to see how humanity handles diplomatic pressure after demonstrating military capabilities. The decision would define humanity's role in galactic affairs for generations. Sarah thought about the children who had been saved from slavery, about the civilian volunteers who had died protecting them, and about Fleet Commander Vexhi's casual assumption that human dignity was irrelevant to galactic politics. Madam President, I recommend we attend the conference, but not as supplicants seeking approval from established powers. We go as equals who have proven our right to exist free from exploitation. President Martinez nodded slowly. That's a dangerous position, Commander. It could lead to isolation from the galactic community. The alternative is accepting that human children can be harvested for slave labor whenever a more advanced species desires it. Some things are worth fighting for, even if the entire galaxy stand against us. Admiral Harrison activated a new display showing real-time intelligence feeds from across human space. Colonial fleets were conducting training exercises with tactics derived from the Kepler battle, while research facilities worked around the clock to develop new weapons technologies. Most significantly, the quantum communication networks were carrying messages from other species seeking alliance with humanity against Zephyrian expansion. Madam President, Admiral Harrison interjected, we're not as isolated as the Mediation Council believes. 17 species have made formal or informal contact expressing interest in defensive cooperation. The galaxy is changing, and humanity is becoming a focal point for resistance to imperial expansion. Sarah watched the intelligence displays with growing understanding. The Battle of Kepler 442b hadn't just saved 400 human children. It had inspired dozens of civilizations to believe that resistance against superior force was possible. Humanity had become a symbol of something the galaxy had forgotten. The principle that freedom was worth any sacrifice. Madam President, I request permission to attend the diplomatic conference as an observer. The other species need to understand exactly what happened at Kepler 442b and why we fought. Commander, you're still recovering from severe neural damage. The medical teams haven't cleared you for extended duty. Then, I'll attend in a medical support chair if necessary. But the galaxy needs to hear from someone who faced the choice between surrender and resistance. They need to understand that humanity will never accept slavery as the price of peace. President Martinez was quiet for several moments, considering options that would echo through galactic history. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of a species that had chosen dignity over survival. Very well, Commander. You'll attend as head of the human delegation, with full authority to negotiate on behalf of our species. Admiral Harrison will coordinate military support for whatever decisions you make. Sarah felt the familiar weight of impossible responsibility settling on her shoulders. In 6 months, she would sit across a negotiating table from representatives of the Zephyrian Empire and argue for humanity's right to exist as equals in galactic society. The outcome would determine whether her sacrifice at Kepler 442b had been the beginning of human freedom or merely a temporary delay in their subjugation. But as she looked at the intelligence displays showing dozens of alien civilizations inspired by human courage, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since the battle. Hope. The galaxy was vast and ancient, filled with species that had accepted imperial dominance as the natural order of things. Humanity was about to teach them that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the odds. The children of Kepler 442b would grow up free, and their freedom would kindle fires of resistance across the stars. The Zephyrian Empire had enslaved species for millennia, but they had never faced anything like human fury when their young were threatened. The galaxy was about to learn the difference between conquest and liberation, between submission and dignity, between the mathematics of warfare and the calculus of human courage. And it would never be the same.